Thank you for coming out on this less than desirable weather evening. It's fine. We're fine. We're okay. It's just mishpacha. It's good. David, are we on the air? Okay, hello to Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea. I've been wanting to say that since we started this nonsense. You guys remember that, right? I don't remember it, but I know who said it. I do know who said it. I want to thank our readers tonight, who are Lonnie and Tom Fleischer and Fred Pius and Nancy Simpson. And we are going to begin with the first slide. There we go. With the onset of this Shabbat, we commit ourselves to nurture the plants and animals, the elements, the womb of sea and soil. We offer ourselves, our ability to create, our potential to stimulate the innovative energies of others and of ourselves for the benefit of all the world. Let us contemplate the significance of life, of the wonders of being human. May our human spirit open the paths of ingenuity, of healing and wonder, of contemplation. For Shabbat is here. Shabbat is here. And I'd like to invite Yossi and Saul to light the candles. Mr. and Mrs. Yossi and Saul. Doctor and mystery.
Baruch haor ba'olam, Baruch haor ba'adam, Baruch haor ba'shalom, ba'shalom, Baruch haor, Baruch haor, Shabbat.
Hello. Remember, you read the red line together. We all read it, okay? Okay. To bring new life to the land, to restore the waters, to refresh the air. On this Shabbat, we join with the earth and with each other to renew the forests, to care for the plants, to protect the creatures. On this Shabbat, we join with the earth and with each other to celebrate the seas, to rejoice in the sunlight, to sing the song of the stars. On this Shabbat, we join with the earth and with each other to recall our responsibilities, to renew our spirits, to reinvigorate our bodies. On this Shabbat, we join with the earth and with each other to recreate the human community, to promote justice and peace, to remember our children. On this Shabbat, we join with the earth and with each other. We join together with purpose that transcends all others, to heal the earth and preserve the life-giving environments of our planet. The end.
Laila
On the fifth day, the scientists who study the rivers were forbidden to speak or to study the rivers. The scientists who study the air were told not to speak of the air. And the ones who worked for the farmers were silenced. And the ones who worked for the bees. Someone from deep in the Badlands began posting facts. The facts were told not to speak. They were taken away. The facts surprised to be taken were silent. Now, it was only the rivers that spoke of the rivers, and only the wind that spoke of its bees, while the unpausing factual buds of the fruit trees continued to move toward their fruit. The silence spoke loudly of silence, and the rivers kept speaking of rivers, of boulders and air. Bound to gravity, earless and tongueless, the untested rivers kept speaking. Bus drivers, shelf stockers, code writers, machinists, accountants, lab techs, cellists kept speaking. They spoke the fifth day of silence.
אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה אז יבוא כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה ננסה מההתחלה. יהיה לנו רע, אין דבר, זה לא נורא. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם.
Loving life and its mystery with all my heart and all my spirit, with all my senses and all my strength, I take upon myself these promises to care for the earth and all who live on it, to pursue justice and peace, to love kindness and compassion. I will teach these to my children throughout the day as I dwell in my home and as I go on my journey from the time I rise up until I fall asleep.
My light is in me. Where is my hope? My hope is in me. Where is my strength? My strength is in me. And in you. And in you. Where is my strength? My strength is in me. And in you, and in you.
So this next reading is excerpted from a poem by Amanda Gorman, the Youth Poet Laureate of the United States. It's called Our Purpose in Poetry, or Earthrise. She begins the poem by noting that it was the Apollo mission that first saw Earth from a distance and the big blue marble that we have become accustomed to seeing. Climate change is the single
made to swaddle the earth. Where were you when the first morning dawned, or the rain first fell, or the hail came down? Can you set forth the lightning or cleft the rock for the water to flow? These questions were meant to humble ancient people who were powerless to comprehend the ways of the world. Our age of ignorance has passed. The time will come when it will be our descendants who are asking the questions. Where were you while the skies were polluted and the oceans filled with trash? Or when the clouds swirled mercilessly over some lands and disappeared from others? Where were you while the oceans lifted, the ice caps melted, and species went extinct at record rates? Why did you fail to contain the damage, to reverse the climate's change, to restore the balance? The questions asked of Job were unfair. The same shall not be said of the questions our children will ask of us.
In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. Tonight we extend our well wishes to these members of our community and their loved ones, to Joe Gaden, Julie Eliason, Karen Tremper-Harris, and Rabbi Peter Schweitzer. And as always, if there's someone you're thinking of as we go around the room, please share their names. Anybody over here? Yes, Helen?
Danny Fenster, who was sentenced today to 11 years of hard labor
In Myanmar, thank you. Anybody else on this side? Over here? May all who suffer know that they are not alone. May they be healed quickly. May they experience a refuah shlema, a complete recovery, the renewal of their bodies, and the renewal of their spirits.
Help us find the courage to
There are stars whose radiance reaches the earth only when they themselves are extinguished and are no more. There are people, the splendor of whose remembrance lights the world, while they are no longer among us. These lights, those that brightly shine in the darkness of the night, they illuminate for us the way. Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death, recalling now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. On this Shabbat, our congregation continues to mourn the death of Roberta Litwin, Yehi Zichra Livracha. And tonight we observe the yahrzeits of Carol Arnold, Charles J. Elfont, Lou Freeman, Philip Gard, Thomas Jacoby, Julius Kingston, John Kurland, Rita Liebhaber, Jeanette Ross, Ruth Schwartzwald, Ida Smokler, Freda Stillwater, and Julian Unger. Yehi Zichram Livracha. May the memories of these beloved people provide us with some measure of comfort as we now face our lives in their absence. If you can do so comfortably, please rise for our humanistic interpretation of Kaddish. We read together, Nit Kadash v'Nit Kadash Beruach HaAdam. Let us dignify and ennoble all people in the spirit of our shared humanity. Let us acclaim the preciousness of life. Let us show gratitude for life by approaching it with reverence. Let us embrace the whole world, even as we wrestle with its parts. Let us each in our own way take up our share in serving the world and seeking truth. May our commitment to life help us to strengthen healing of spirit and peace of mind. May justice and peace permeate and comfort the house of Israel and all those who dwell on earth. And let us say, Ken Yehi, may it be so. Please be seated. Before we continue with our guest, whose name is already up behind me, just a couple of reminders of our upcoming schedule. We will meet next week at the regular time, and we'll hear from Jerry Peterson, who is the director of the Ruth Ellison Center for LGBTQ youth. And I really want to encourage a nice turnout for that. Amy Good put me in contact with him, and I think he's done incredible work, and it'll be, I think, very important news that he brings us about the work that he does. The following week, we will be recovering from our Thanksgiving turkey. So we won't be here, as is our usual practice. And then when we return, we'll return at a different hour, 6:30 p.m. on Friday, December 3rd, because Hanukkah starts almost like the minute we're done with our turkey. And that's the only Shabbat that we have inside Hanukkah for our wonderful Super Supper, sponsored by the Social Justice Committee, always a highlight every year. We expect a really nice turnout. We won't have to just drive up and have them throw the soup at us like last year. No, they didn't throw it, but it was almost as lonely in some ways, even though it was still a great event. As you know, all of the proceeds go to help us with the Noah feeding program and the big mitzvah that we do every winter, which we hope we'll be doing again this winter in person, and hopefully things will continue to get better. After that, on December 10th, I'll be speaking about a little bit of something in the season, in the spirit of the season, answering the question, or maybe not, was Jesus a real person? Did he actually exist? I'll give you the spoiler. but it's an interesting journey that we get there. And then on December 17th, we're going to hear, this is Congressman and Congresswoman, I guess, session here at the Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, because Andy Levin will be coming to speak to us about his two-state solution proposed legislation, something that I personally am very supportive of. I think I'm going to be writing something for someone somewhere in the local press supporting that. And then we will take our break for the birth of the person who either did or didn't exist, but more importantly for the national holiday and for the secular New Year, and we'll return again in January. So that's what's coming up. But tonight, I want to thank you all for coming out to hear Rabbi Moshe Givental and the Social Justice Committee and Audrey Pleasant for putting me in touch with him. Rabbi Givental was born in Vilnius, Lithuania, at the time part of the Soviet Union. And in 1990, he and his family immigrated to the United States. To Illinois, was it?
No, here.
Oh, it was here. You guys, okay, because I noticed in Illinois in your bio, and I was living there when the resettlement was going on. Rabbi Givental holds a BA in psychology from U of M and an MA in clinical psychology from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology. He received his rabbinical training and ordination at Hebrew College, a non-denominational rabbinical school, not to be confused with Hebrew Union College, which is where I went. This is actually probably a better school. That's from everything I've heard. I'll tell you later some of what's going on over there if you haven't already heard.
I can complain about mine too.
It's been a while for me. Since then, Rabbi Givental has worked as a congregational rabbi across denominations. He's worked as a therapist, specializing in supporting folks struggling with homelessness, as a teacher in prisons, and as a chaplain supporting organizers doing environmental justice work, which is the connection, the nexus that brings him to us tonight. Currently, he's working as a hospice chaplain and a life coach. He's the proud uncle of 2 rambunctious kindergarten-age nieces and loves spending time with nature, music, and anyone who reminds him to laugh. Well, we're a place where we laugh often, but maybe not so much at this topic. But I am very appreciative for you bringing us the facts tonight. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming Rabbi Moshe Givental.
Thank you, Rabbi, for that really warm and humor-filled introduction. Really thankful to be able to take this mask off for a moment. I am vaccinated, like all of you. Thank God for science. And thank you, Audrey, for bringing me here. So give me a moment to gather some strength. Probably going to need more strength, so I'm going to bring the water over here. Second note as I start, do what all my teachers did, which is take their watch off. So it's in front of me, so I am more likely to notice the time, and I'm going to note that in my notes here. That doesn't mean that I will notice the time, so someone please tell me to be quiet when it's time to do that. So such a pleasure to be here. It turns out that I live just walking distance from you, 12-mile between Middle Belt and Orchard Lake. So I took a nice stroll over here and feel real grateful for this wonderful weather, and to join a humanistic congregation for the first time. So you're also, I'm really glad to be here, and you're relieving some Jewish guilt of living in Metro Detroit, the home place of humanistic Judaism, and having met Rabbi Jeff before at some protests, but never actually having been in a humanistic congregation. So I feel a lot of appreciation for the chance to join you, to sing with you, to reflect with you today. In putting together the title of this talk today, I think we overshot a little bit. I hope to plant some seeds in the direction of finding balance and finding our place. The movements that we're talking about, environmental justice, is, perhaps by some measures new, though of course a number of you are a little older than me. So you were around, right, in the 1960s, 1970s, when people, at least Westerners, became aware of environmental problems in a new way. Of course, indigenous folks have been aware of the consequences of Western lifestyle and industrial technology and revolution for a while. But the movement is quite gigantic. So by some estimates, there are over 1 million organizations around the planet. Not 1 million individuals, but 1 million organizations around the planet, all working in the direction of some environmental, forgive my language here, environmental sanity. Because, Jeff and I talked about this, I apologize, but as a psychotherapist, I want to say there's a kind of a schizophrenia, perhaps, that Western civilization, the global North has in being disconnected with the reality of what's happening. It's not just a matter of getting technology right or wrong. So can we have slide number 2? Let's see if the slide showed up. I'm so happy that the picture showed up. Hopefully you recognize some of these pictures, some of these people here. This is from your website. I'm hoping some of these folks are still here. So this is a heavy topic. So before we go into the heaviness, I want to start us off with, who are we fighting for? And that's our families, our loved ones, our community. I invite you to take a moment to breathe that in, to think about the people that you love the most, to think about what brings you the most joy. If you're sitting with a friend or a family member, perhaps touch their shoulder, their hand. Think you can poke them. And notice how your body feels thinking about your loved ones. Like, notice, is there some release, relaxation, some warmth? Maybe your breath slows down a little bit. Because the topic of climate change or climate disruption, environmental disruption, is a heavy one. Brings with it a lot of very different kinds of emotions. Yeah, those kinds of emotions. Can't help but having emotions. Just like we're always having thoughts, we are always having emotions. The only question is, are we aware of our emotions or not? So I'm going to invite you here and also later as I speak to help and share what emotions are coming up for you. You don't have to raise your hand, just scream it out. As you think about climate change, environmental justice, injustice, what emotions come up?
Fear.
Fear, yep. What else?
Exhaustion.
Of course, exhaustion, yeah.
I worked in 1970 to 73 at the Sierra Club in San Francisco, organizing environmental conferences for teachers at Big Sur. The topic was global warming and climate change.
Yeah.
We had Paul Newman for our guest speaker. And it's been 50 years, and everybody knew that we had a great idea that nobody was paying any attention.
So perhaps exhaustion, frustration, despair, fury, anger, yeah.
You just said the right word as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
We're living in the middle of a great extinction,
Yep.
which we are causing. So my feeling is despair, because I don't see that it's stopping.
Yeah, of course, despair,
Hopelessness
hopelessness,
and guilt.
and guilt. Yeah.
Anxiety.
Anxiety, yeah. So that's anger. Yeah, so that is normal. That means you're awake. That means you're aware. If someone's talking about environmental issues and they say they don't have any feelings about it, they just have a solution, let's work on the solution, that means that they're not connected to what's going on, and which is fine. That's normal. But it means that their emotions are probably pushing them in ways that they don't realize. And our problem is not the emotions. Our problem is not climate anxiety. Our problem is the problem, climate change. Climate anxiety, fear, anger, frustration, hopelessness, those are just symptoms of what's happening. So, in order to do something, we first need to understand what is actually happening. And the conversation, unfortunately, usually stops with fossil fuels, as if burning fossil fuels is their only environmental problem. Of course, we all know that that is not the case. We named some things earlier in the poetry and the songs, but let's just all get on the same page again. and call out what are the different dimensions of our environmental problems. Water pollution, yep. Methane. You said extinction. All right, so species, not just one or two, but species going extinct at a rate unprecedented in millions of years. That's how I first stumbled into environmental issues. That reality floored me. What does it mean to be a human being if this is what human beings, or as I later understood, Western society perhaps does to the world? It's more complex. What else? What other dimensions?
Refugee crisis.
So it's a consequence. We're going to get to that in a moment, right? Refugees for all sorts of reasons, but definitely more chaotic climate. We're already seeing that. This is not, sometimes we talk about climate change as a problem that will happen like by 2100. The temperatures will rise to whatever, the seas will perhaps rise to whatever, as if this is a thing in the future. This doesn't work for human beings. Human beings don't generally react to problems in the faraway future. We react much more to problems in the present. So climate refugees are already happening. I think 250 million climate refugees last year. Yeah, other dimensions. What else? Yeah, in the back. Food shortage. Food shortage, yep. Poverty.
The Marshall Islands are already losing land to the water.
Losing lands. A lot of island nations are losing lands. Of course, the poorest folks are living in those areas, indigenous folks, yeah. Overconsumption. So general overconsumption in modern society. Most, yes?
Damage to our rainforests and the oceans.
Yeah, damage to our rainforests and the oceans. Just a piggyback on that, right? So it's not just sort of, a little bit of damage. The forests and oceans are some of our biggest carbon sinks. They also sources of food and medicine and a million other things, but if we just stick to the carbon, a huge percentage of the carbon and methane and other gases that's emitted are absorbed by the forests, especially the Amazon, and by the oceans. We don't know exactly what their limit is, but when we hit that limit, at that point, even if we stop producing carbon and burning fossil fuels, things, instead of being carbon sinks, they will become carbon emitters. So in the last few years, there have been months where the Amazon rainforest was no longer a carbon sink. It's a big deal. And we don't know exactly where the turning point with the oceans will be. And this is called, it's one of those feedback loops that like once we go over that, things get worse in an additional exponential way. Did I see more hands? Yeah.
Animal extinction.
Yeah. Yeah. Animal extinction. Yeah.
Melting of the ice cap.
Melting of the ice caps, which, of course, right, sea level rise on the one hand. Also, once all of that, there are also sources of fresh water. Where there's ice on mountains on land where there's a population. So once that melts completely, you no longer have new additional fresh water after the winter ends. So big problem. Let's turn to the next slide. I made a list. You guys have hit a lot of these and more. So what did we not say? Agriculture, fantastic. Thank God we have it. On some scale, super useful. Also, when we have industrial scale, chemical agriculture, just by the nature of planting things on that scale, that means we destroy the entire ecosystem that was present there. And what do you think sucks up more carbon? Trillions of square miles of corn, or diverse forests, grasslands, animals, everything that you can imagine. So agriculture, obviously, we need to plant food. The scale at which we do it and the amount of land that we clear every year to plant either more food, but actually more and more in order for the grazing of cows is extraordinarily destructive, the way that we do it. Western consumption, we all said. One thing maybe we didn't mention is mining. So I'm going to connect this to green technology. Very great that we have technology that is in some ways green. That is really wonderful, that it is not burning fossil fuels while it's operating. However, you still have to build the technology. And most of our green technology doesn't have a way of being recycled yet. So that means even if we somehow have the political will to completely transition to solar panels, wind power, that means that we will have to mine all the materials to rebuild infrastructure for the entire world. Think about how much mining that will be, what fuel is going to be used when we do that mining, whose lands will be destroyed in the process, and then we will have to mine again in about 20, 25 years. Yeah?
Yeah, remind me again, carbon is bad for our atmosphere, is that correct?
In overabundance, it's bad for our atmosphere.
And the trees suck up that carbon?
Yes.
They
Yep.
inhale it?
Yep, they inhale.
And they help us out by reducing carbon.
Yeah.
And why is carbon bad for the environment? Because it blocks sunlight? Or?
So carbon, like every other chemical, isn't good or bad. The issue is how much of it we have and a matter of balance and homeostasis. So think of the human body. Sugar isn't bad for you. You need sugar. Neither is salt, neither is fat. We need all of those. It's a matter of how much of those we consume. So the same thing with carbon dioxide and methane and some other gases. We're pumping so many of them out. Sort of think of being in your garage and having the car on and that smoke continuing to pump in the garage and you breathing that in day after day after day.
And the forests help us by eliminating that?
Yeah, the forests, all vegetation, also algae, breathe in. We also breathe out carbon dioxide. So what we breathe out, they breathe in. It's a very nice reciprocity and balance there that evolution has taken care for us. Yeah. So we're in a double whammy by putting out too much carbon dioxide and also cutting down the forest, which would help regulate it, as well as polluting the oceans. So maybe if we hadn't been cutting down forests and polluting the oceans for the last 100 years, maybe we wouldn't be at such a crisis with climate, even if we were producing all that we're producing right now. So like the human body, there's no one factor that's a problem, right? If there are any doctors in here, right? It's a matter of how everything affects and with each other and the balance of the different chemicals. That's a really good question. Thank you. Let's see, toxic chemicals. I'll just sprinkle there. Number 4, overuse of underground aquifers for fresh water. Not a climate problem. However, we are consuming water at a much faster rate than the millions of years that it takes to refill those aquifers. Not a problem in Michigan. Not a problem in Wisconsin. Big problem California, New Mexico, Arizona, Australia. Really, really serious problem with fresh water. Yeah, none of these are a problem by themselves. All life requires other life. The issue is a matter of scale. Let's go to the next slide. So some images, because that's a lot of words. To take it in, pictures help. So we started talking a little bit about consequences. What are the consequences beyond rising sea level rise in 2100 if you happen to live near the coast? For the rest of us, may not matter. What are the consequences of being destructive to our home? And I mean that, literally. Like the world that makes our life possible. In English, we call it an environment, as if it's like this sort of thing that's like somewhere else. The ecosystems are what make our lives possible, right? Whether or not you happen to believe in God in this congregation, literally what gives us life is the fact that ecosystem works in the way that it does. So what are some consequences beyond rising sea levels? Melting glaciers, yeah.
Well, we touched on that earlier, the migrations.
Oh, right.
By displacement.
Right, we said climate migrants, great. What else? Drought, right. California, Middle East, Israel, big problem. Very, very, very big problem. Huge contributor to, let's just say, the tensions in our very beloved and really complicated home. What else? Extreme weather patterns, right? And chaotic weather patterns. This is a very, very important distinction. Sometimes we talk about climate change, global warming. There's this sense of it'll only get warmer. And so some politicians will hold up snowballs and say ridiculous things. Climate change does not mean there's not going to be winter. Climate change, think of you getting a fever, okay? Your sense of temperature will bounce up and down. It means there's going to be more chaotic weathers, which of course affects our ability to grow food. It affects our ability to maybe if not produce electricity, then be able to send electricity from place A to place B and to get there dependably. You know, think of Texas this past winter with much lower temperatures than they're used to. So the chaotic climate disrupts food supply, disrupts energy grid, disrupts everything. Other dimensions that we haven't mentioned. So this is all happening right now. This is not in just 2100.
Well, I'm thinking about flooding.
Yep.
Water's coming in.
Yep.
Enormous amounts of floods all over there.
Yeah. And Detroit is a great example of this, and a great painful example of environmental justice, that it's always a combination of nature plus human systems. So Detroit didn't just flood, I think, 3-4 times in this past year, because somehow Detroit got more rain than Farmington Hills. Maybe that happened to some extent. It's because of how the sewer system is built and which parts get upkeep and who lives where, and the same thing with New Orleans and the rest of the world. Yeah, flooding. Other additions? Right, think of fires last summer, California, Oregon, Washington, at scales that we have not seen before. Climate change is not the only contributor. We're also not taking care of the forests well. So there's some aspects of what Republicans say that may be accurate. We're also over-draining the aquifers. There's a million contributing factors, but definitely climate change is one of them. Let's go to the next slide. I imagine you guys hit most of what I thought of, but maybe not everything else. So number 3, sort of we touched, right? Increased rates of illness and death due to heat stroke, asthma, insect-borne illnesses, Lyme disease. Raise your hand if you have or know someone who's had Lyme. Okay, so we're pretty lucky. You're going to see more and more of that, because as climate changes, insects, animals migrate, and also as temperature is more chaotic, but it is also a warmer a bit longer. Insects will survive more through the winter season and therefore spread. So this is not 2100, this is today. Also Zika, triple E, all sorts of insect-borne diseases are going to become prevalent in places that they did not used to be. Increased likelihood of pandemics. I made this list before our current pandemic. This is a list from a few years ago. So whether or not this particular pandemic was caused by climate change is a really long and complex question. And the reality is, as populations get more dense, as more glaciers melt, diseases that have been long hidden or were just in animals in the jungle that we didn't have any contact with will come into contact with human populations. So whether or not climate directly causes X is not the question. The reality is that we'll have more of that, and therefore disruption on the scale that we are experiencing right now. So disruption to food production and transportation, which we've all experienced, disruption to the energy grid, which Texas experienced, loss of fresh water springs I talked about, financial cost of all of these things, mental health costs that we're all experiencing of all of these things. So the US military calls climate change, number 9, a threat multiplier. So whatever our politicians do or don't agree on, the US military, which is not exactly a liberal institution, also not too concerned with fossil fuels. I think they're like, second to the US and China, the biggest consumer of fossil fuels on the entire globe, understands climate change and disruption to be a threat multiplier, meaning whatever discord and tension there is within a country or between countries, climate disruption is going to make that more tense, and so there will be more and more conflict until and unless we, as a global population, decide to make a difference. Increased xenophobia, we mentioned immigrants, right? Racism, climate change does not cause xenophobia, does not cause racism, but it stokes those things as there's more and more tension, and of course, increased anti-Semitism as well. Migration refugees, we mentioned. Who is impacted first and foremost, unfortunately, is all too obvious to us in the room. Next slide, please. I think we have an image to take a moment to breathe. Notice what emotions come up. Notice what's happening in your body, where you tense. Next slide. How many psychotherapists or social workers in the room? Well, I thought you were a historian. Okay, once upon a time. Okay, many fields. 1, 2, 3. Okay, 4, 5. Yeah, so Kubler-Ross, 5 stages of grief and loss. Of course, today we know that they're not stages like one after another. It's complex. We could make this map much more complex. This is a reality that is not often acknowledged, that the consequences aren't just physical and logistics, they're emotional. Also for some of us, existential, spiritual. I want to point out anger and denial on this list. So some of the responses you will see from perhaps the other side of the aisle, though I don't want to make huge assumptions where everyone stands here politically. So some of the, well, actually, we'll start with denial. Some of the denial is political. So we know very, very clearly that some of the very same advisors that were hired by the tobacco companies in the 1960s, 70s, 80s to come up with all sorts of nonsense, to confuse people that perhaps, who knows, smoking is somehow good for you. They were very effective at it, which is why people still smoke, millions of people. The same advisors, same strategy used by the oil companies in order to first deny and then at least cast doubt onto the climate science. So yes, there is that. Also, denial is an emotional response. I've met many, many, many people who understand what is happening, and it is simply so overwhelming, which makes sense, that they can't think about it. They can't do anything about it because what is the point? Denial is not just politics. There are some ways in which I think Republicans, at least some Republicans, may be more honest with themselves about climate than most Democrats, because I think some of their responses come from a place of, to respond to this problem, we don't need to just cut some fuel subsidies. You're talking about needing to transform our entire economy, our entire way of life, and that I am not ready to do, we're not going to do. Whereas a lot of our democratic policies, proposals, even the Green New Deal, in some ways is reshuffling the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Because to respond to this situation requires a completely different society. We are a society, we didn't come up with this, but we're inheritors, for example, who came up with toilets where we flush perfectly drinkable water, mix it with good fertilizer, also known as our feces, and send it who knows where. Perfectly drinkable water, fertilizer, we literally flush down the toilet. This is normal for all of us. That's the kind of toilet I have. But that is a kind of schizophrenia. It is a disconnection from reality. A healthy society would not throw away perfectly drinkable water, especially when there's a lack of it, which there's actually a lack of in Metro Detroit. In Detroit, drinkable water is really, really expensive. It's a huge problem. We're also a society that decides, and this includes myself as well, that it is more convenient to use utensils which require someone drilling oil in the middle of the Arctic, someone on the other side of the world working for poverty wages to turn that into plastic, then shipping it halfway across the world, then we use it and we throw it away, as opposed to simply washing our own utensils. Not criticizing anyone here, I do it too. What I'm pointing out is there's a certain disconnect from regular common sense, from practical reality and the consequences of our choices that is endemic in Western civilization. So understanding what's happening emotionally is really, really vital. This is not just a technological problem. Please, next slide. So I'm going to bring us to a landing here in the next few minutes with the question of what do we do? I'm not going to uncover a whole new universe for you. I'm not going to tell you there is one thing that is the most important thing to do. As I said in the very beginning, the climate's ecology is just like biology, like our bodies. There's not one thing that is the most important thing in order to be healthy. Biological systems are much, much more complicated. So what I can give you is a map with 4 general points, and we'll open things up for discussion. So the first one is to leverage your personal strengths. So you don't need to become a politician if that is not your strength. You don't need to become an activist if that's not something you feel free and safe to do. You need to use whatever your skills and strengths are, whatever your training is. If you are a therapist, then one of your jobs is to support individuals that come to you with climate anxiety and overwhelm, as well as going to conferences and helping to educate folks as to the emotional consequences and underpinnings of these issues. If you are a historian, we desperately need a deep, deep understanding how we came to these problems, that they did not just start 10 years ago, 20, 30, 40, or 50 years ago, that their entire worldviews, which is why I gave the example of toilets with flushing perfectly drinkable water, their entire worldviews, it's a tiny, silly example, but their entire worldviews that make it natural and obvious for us to build a civilization that we have, that if we're actually able to step back, would be ridiculous, not tenable. If you are an engineer, you don't need to become an activist or a politician. We need you advising local communities, going to conferences, and helping to build up a truly green and renewable energy grid. You do need to, if you want to make a huge difference, it does require all of our energy, but it doesn't actually require for you to retrain what you do. Your biggest impact is the thing that you are already great at, naturally great at, or what you've spent years, perhaps decades, training and doing professionally. And there's just a 3-point map of different levels that we can act on. One is actions to slow the damage. So no amount of me recycling and me composting is going to stop climate change, right? But the more that I do those things, the more that I change my personal consumer choices, the more that I can slow the impact of climate disruption down. So perhaps it's not as fancy as going to a protest. It's not as fancy as going to a huge conference in Glasgow. However, it may be the place where you have the most leverage. Number 2, analysis of structural causes and the creation of alternatives. That would be the creation of different kind of systems, different kinds of energy systems, different kinds of choice making, political system, the creation of different kinds of food systems on your local, right, perhaps family level, synagogue level, community level. We need different kind of structures. And number 3, which is where I tend to stand as a former therapist and as a rabbi, is transforming world views and consciousness. This is working together with our historians to see how did we come to this place to view the world that literally makes our life possible, what indigenous folks will refer to as, right, the earth, our mother. You don't need to believe that in some religious way, but it is biologically true. We actually don't need to save the earth. The earth will be fine. If human race disappears, the earth will be totally fine. No one needs to protect the earth. It's our own lives, it's our own skin in the game. So we need folks to help us understand as individuals and communities, how do we get to this place that we value, for example, in this great democracy of ours. I'm so glad to be here and not in the Soviet Union, right? But that puts profit really above everything else. And it is those deep changes and folks working on all 3 levels, leveraging your own strengths, that we need to make a difference. Actions to slow the change, understanding and creating different systems that are not just maybe sustainable but regenerative, and helping folks understand the deep emotional realities and the worldviews that we all take for granted that make it natural and obvious and easy for all of us to live the way that we do. When we shift those things, the first 2 levels become much easier. So I will end with 2 things. One, a reminder of where we started, that while this is extraordinarily daunting, there are over 1 million organizations around the world working on the same issue, in the same direction, in a completely unprecedented event in all of human history. That's never been the case before. There's millions of communities around the whole globe, across every nation, across every religion, that are working in the same direction. And a reading from the author and activist Rebecca Solnit on hope. She writes, "Hope locates itself in the premises that we don't know what will happen, and that in the spaciousness of uncertainty is room to act. When you recognize uncertainty, you recognize that you may be able to influence the outcomes. You alone, or you in concert with a few dozen or several million others. Hope is an embrace of the unknown and unknowable, an alternative to the certainty of both optimists and pessimists." Say that again. An alternative to the certainty of both optimists and pessimists. Optimists who think all will be fine, with or without our involvement, a kind of fortune telling that specifically as a Russian-born Jew, I find really difficult to stomach. And pessimists who are much more familiar to me, who take the opposite position, that there's absolutely nothing that we can do. It is in the uncertainty of this moment and of life that we have the greatest chance to act. It is the belief that what we do matters, even though how and when it may matter, who and what it may impact are not things we can know beforehand. We may not, in fact, know them afterwards either, but they matter all the same, and history is full of people whose influence was most powerful after they were gone. That is my 2 cents. Thoughts, questions?
Let me get the microphone. You're not going to be able to pass it right over here. Talk loud. Can we go over there? Not just talk loud from where you are.
You can also come up here. I've been standing here for too long.
I think I want to speak loud enough.
Take your mask off, though, and project.
Sorry. So I think you were very gentle. I think that I want to address you to respond. Can't hear you.
Saying that I was very gentle in my presentation.
You said gentle, very gentle, and he suggested that if we watch our pencils, that can make a difference when we know that it will take an international collaboration to stymie the annual creation and use and distribution of excess carbon. And every year that we pump carbon into the atmosphere, it will not disappear for hundreds of years. It accumulates, is held in the atmosphere, and it is never getting better, it's only getting worse. What we have is a finite amount of time. And the species could potentially become extinct. Life on the planet could. And the question is, if the carbon accumulated in substantial amounts, it would come to a point that no matter what you did, even if you eliminated all the production of carbon, you could go into what's called runaway. And it would only become so terrible. It gets worse every year no matter what you do. We still have time. The question, I think, is where is the urgency? We have just had a worldwide meeting that just ended, I think, tonight. And on that meeting, there is not one iota of reducing the amount of gas or oil that is being produced, manufactured, and consumed. They're proposing a reduction in methane or elimination of methane and coal over the next 20 years, and that's, or 10, 15, 20 years, and that's helpful. But it's a drop in the bucket. So my point is, every year that we get carbon in excess, and for right now it looks like it's going to be 30, 50, 70 years, that means things are going to get worse every single year and never better. How much suffering do we have to come to before we take the action? Where people finally say, do whatever you have to do. Well, let's get going. And right now, as you suggested, the only thing that seems to be of importance is, since we're short-term responders with pain and suffering, that's when we finally get off our ass and start responding. And this seems to be a longer-term problem before it gets acute enough. And incidentally, we'll never get better. So the question you posed is hopelessness and despair and inaction versus doing something. And I want want you to know, every one of us can stop using carbon today. It won't work if you don't have every billions of people and nations producing and creating this. So this is an international problem, national problems. World leadership has to feel that national needs will actually be transcended because every national need is going to be involved with this international problem. So,
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. I want to take some additional thoughts. And Rabbi, please tell us when we should move on and close. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just have one quick appreciation for your comment, for your suggestion that each of us are ready to have.
Use the mic if you want.
Nancy, come on over.
We couldn't pass it around.
Oh,
Come on over.
I can speak loud.
Please put your mask on.
Mask on, mask on, mic.
Where did I put my
Okay.
mask?
Good.
Okay, I just want to say thank you, Rabbi, because you inspired me to think about what I can do. I have been feeling like so many of us completely helpless, but thinking about the things that I've been doing all my life, where are my best attributes? My personality, how can I apply myself in areas where I'm comfortable? Gave me a lot of good food for thought, made me think about things that I had not been able to open up to thinking about, because I think that's wonderful. Each of us has abilities and areas where we're comfortable in. I'm not an activist in the streets, but I have other attributes that I can apply. So I just want to say thank you. You really gave me some good food for thought
You're welcome.
and hope.
You're welcome. Do we have time for maybe one person? Should I wrap up? Maybe or two, if succinctly, and then we'll continue the conversation as we Jews schmooze and continue to disagree. So let's not all agree. That would be silly.
Anybody else want to come to the mic? All right, I think we're
So then I'll respond to these two comments that I agree with 100%. And then I want to apologize for being unclear if I gave the impression that personal consumer choices can stop climate change. I don't think that's possible. Personal consumer choices make a difference, right? In the story that we all probably know best with this, it's called the Starfish Story, right? Guy walking down, right, the shore, and he's throwing the starfishes back, and right, the other guy, woman, says, you can't possibly get all of them. He says, you're right. It matters to that one. So it totally, our personal consumer choices, no amount of them, everyone in this room and everyone moves to the woods and eats grass for the rest of our lives, still doesn't stop climate change. But it makes a difference. And in the other direction, I agree as well, to really turn things around requires a global effort that is not just political, that is a transformation of consciousness, of creating a completely different society. So one way I have of trying to integrate these two things is, and he also writes that I soft pedal some things because we don't know each other too well. And the weight of this is huge, so what we really need is all of us as mental health professionals here together to help us grieve and process, and pointing out realities that need to be pointed out of the danger. If we do that without giving people emotional resources, we'll just shut us down. So I want us to be clear with the facts. I also want us to have the emotional resources to be able to live with those facts and then act, because while this is an emergency, a lot of terrible things, choices get made sometimes in emergency modes. We overlook the people who most need help. So in terms of, this is my closing, in terms of optimism or hope, usually, or in other times, I point people towards courage, relationship, and integrity. Life is finite no matter what happens. So whether or not climate change can be turned around or not, I don't know. I also don't know if we're already past the tipping point. But I feel pretty clear that if we all live with more courage, with more attention to relationship, and more paying attention to living with integrity to our own values, that whatever we do between now and then will feel meaningful, will feel fulfilling. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was actually what I was going to ask you, is for the rabbinical nechemta, the comfort, because all this did for me was make me much more stressed out on top of this pandemic. I mean, you can see I keep yelling at my congregants to put their damn masks on, but we're in this situation now where we all feel very much helpless and hopeless.
So that makes sense, and there are reasons for that in addition to the situation, the political system that we're in, that teaches us learned helplessness, that tells us silly things, as you pointed out, that our consumer choices are actually the biggest impact that we can make. It's not true. They matter, but they're not our biggest impact. It makes sense to feel frustrated, and we need community where it's normative to express that frustration, where we have communal support. We human beings, in my understanding, were not designed, evolved, to handle this level of frustration and this level of danger as individuals. We evolved to live in community, and I guess debunking another worldview, it is a misunderstanding that Darwin believed in the survival of the fittest. It's just not true. It's what I learned at school. I imagine that's what most of you learned. That's what we hear on the news all the time. That is not what he believed, and that is not what biologists believe today. What actually survives is communities with the greatest cooperation. It is true for ants, it is true for human beings. And the worldview that we survive through survival of the fittest contributes greatly to our society and climate change, as well as racism and xenophobia and everything else. And it is just not true. The fittest don't survive. It's communities that work together that do.
Thank you very much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
All right. Well, this was my note of hopefulness, was this song, for us to conclude with, Mashana Ba'ah. I think you had an extraordinary job to do tonight, and you did it extremely well, and I'm really grateful for you being here. The psychological developments of this, the psychological components of this are really burdensome, and it's not something we think about quite as much. And the sanity was the right word. Go ahead.
בשנה הבאה נשבה מרפסת ונזמור ציפורים נודדות. ילדים בחופשה ישחקו תופסת בין הבית לבין השדות. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without them wondering whether on that day dark new clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world it will be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world it will be if we share, if we care, you and me.
Once again, thank you, David Weeks, for doing the streaming. Thank you to Ezra for the music, and thank you, Rabbi Givental. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.